My life is very, very different, but the one thing that hasn't changed is the richness of human stories and the depth of connection that you build. Hospitality is all about customers and farmers and, the inside jokes in the kitchen and all that sort of stuff. And you build this, rich, diverse relationships.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. It wasn't all that long ago that the idea of sustainability and care for the environment were marketing catchphrases and cliches. But times have changed. The notion of sustainability is not just about food waste. And for chef Jared Ingersoll, it's become a life ambition to not only change habits, actions, and ideals about the notion of sustainability, but how to put them into practice within venues, culture, businesses, to make a better planet for all of us. Jared, how are you?
I am excellent, thank you, Anthony.
You've got a pretty big mission at the moment. What's it like delving into the world of sustainability like you have in over the last decade?
I've always been engaged in sustainability. It's just that nowadays it's just becoming a lot more front of mind, and when people think about sustainability, it's it's a bit more of an articulate thing, and it's also shifting from when I started Dank Street Depot all those years ago, it was very much focused on. I had this sort of mission of wanting to make the world a better place, one mouthful at a time, and very much focused on local, seasonal, and sustainable. Like it wasn't just a catchphrase; it was like because just having that connection to seasonality and provenance meant that we could really focus on working with growers and suppliers that practiced good animal husbandry and looked after the environment.
You're right. As you say, it was as well before sort of this path that you've taken at the moment, and with Dank Street Depot. Were there challenges at the time in trying to take that approach and change people's minds?
Yeah, and at the beginning, I think the mistake that I made in the beginning was I was on a bit of a mission, and I kind of made it a little bit political in some ways. We sort of made a point of, there was, you'll probably remember there was a while there when everyone was, 100-mile, only buy food from 100 miles, and so we did things such as focusing just on New South Wales wines, for example, and at that time it was sometimes seen as being, you're only doing that because of environmental reasons, and that was true, but we were also doing it because we wanted to celebrate the range and the diversity and the quality of New South Wales wines. And so there was a period where people weren't interested; they just wanted lunch, and and so it was trying to get the balance right to make sure that we were delivering food on time, and at the right price, so that and then use the food and the quality of the food to then start the conversation, rather than hitting people with the conversation to start off with.
Take us back into the kitchen with Dank Street Depot when you were really sort of starting this movement and changing also the perceptions of everyday eats in Australia. Were you getting in sort of whole animals and trying to break down to reduce food waste and all those sort of things in the kitchen as well?
Yeah, definitely. And so it was a bit of a journey. So when we first started, we opened up. We had no idea how busy it was going to be. We had a queue at the door the next day, and that queue sort of stayed with us for about 11 years. And our weekends were just monstrous. So we kind of got slapped pretty hard at the beginning. And so the first period of time was just trying to keep up. But then once we sort of established our systems and processes, because what we were trying to do hadn't really been done before. Like you had the likes of Chez Panisse or you might have some regional restaurants where they're sitting in food bowls and they've got that easy access. But we're sort of in semi-industrial part of Sydney that no one really went to, and and it was and so it was we opened up with just a blackboard menu, and it took a while to I didn't just communicate what the vision was to our suppliers and then make connections with really good growers and providers. And so it was a bit of a some of the things we used to do were with seafood, rather than putting like a particular species of fish on the menu, I would just work really closely with what seafood was available, and I really tried to focus on things that weren't just salmon or tuna or groper, like just work with species that are a little bit more diverse. We always used to buy in whole fish and whole poultry, and then we started working our way up the size of the beast. So then we'd get in whole lambs, whole pigs, and then we started experimenting with buying whole cows, and we didn't have a lot of space. So the way that we'd manage the bigger animals, we'd just buy them in quarters and break them down.
Tell us about bringing in that sort of whole pig, or breaking down a whole pig, and how you used all of it across a menu.
It was a real joy. So I'd been really lucky to have worked at Bayswater Brasserie back in the day. And so we'd go through 10 to 15 lambs a week, and we're just constantly breaking down animals. The volumes of meat that we were doing at Danktree weren't anywhere near the same amount. So, where instead of getting 15 lambs, we'd get, 2 or 3, or 1 or 2 pigs. And so you then have to, sort of manage the parts of the animal. So you just sort of work through the whole thing, and some cuts you need to serve, fairly quickly, all the really beautiful things like the tails and the ears and the offal and just those smaller pieces. We'd sort of work out different ways of either not preserving them until you had enough to put a dish on the menu. But I know this is the Crackling, and so let's dwell on the pig for a bit. I was actually
Thank you.
I was thinking about when you asked me to come on this podcast, which I was honoured to do. I try to think about what is it about a pig that I like, and it's it's always on my menu and it's always in my diet. But when I used to deal with it, the one thing I used to love is it's a really nice thing to break down. Like I really enjoyed the process of butchering a pig. It would get an animal in. Would always go to lengths to make sure that we had some sort of knowledge or at least connection with the producer of the pigs. And I'd try to buy pigs from different places, and it wasn't just a case of dealing with one supplier all the time, because I like to diversify the story of the different animals. But then, so we'd get the animal and let it hang in the core room for anywhere from 2 to 5 days. I didn't like dealing with the pigs when they were fresh. I like them when they just hung for a bit. And I haven't broken down a pig for a while, but I used to love the fact that they were really nice and easy to cut. They're really clean. You make really nice clean cuts, and even the fat was like when you break down lambs, it's a different type of fat. Like it's sort of really, it's cloying and it's got that sort of aroma to it. But a pig is just it's nice and it's clean. It's very easy to work with.
I want to explore, what you did with Dank Street Depot and beyond that. But take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play in your family as a kid?
It played the role of keeping us alive. So, so it was mum brought up us kids by herself, and so food was functional. She wasn't. She was one of those. She wasn't awesome cook, but she wasn't doing. There were no phones, and there was nothing. There was it was all just sort of like feeding the kids, and but she really really loved food, and it was kind of the thing that really got me. Sort of something in my head clicked when I was very very young, and one of the first things I cooked for my mum was a beggar's chicken, and I got the recipe from Woman's Weekly, and it was like a chicken with all these beautiful Chinese spices and flavorings, and you've wrapped up in a salt crust and baked, and I think I was about 12 when I did that, and there were two things that sort of clicked in my head. Like the first one was that. To find star anise in Upper Hutt in New Zealand when I was 12 was not easy. And so to find the ingredients was a bit of a process. And I kind of really enjoyed that component of looking at a recipe, figuring out what these words were. This is pre-Google, so it was like having to do the good old do the procurement the good old fashioned way by just going down to the shops, and then the other thing that really blew me away and sort of cemented everything that I wanted to do in my head, even though I hadn't quite worked it all out. But when Mum finally got around to eating, where she would normally be cooking every single night, I took that chore away from her and I gave her something that she had not eaten before, and she loved it. And there was just this moment of sort of proud. I was really proud and made Mum happy, and that made me feel really awesome. And that sort of feeling. Maybe I've always been needy, but that's one of the things that's always fueled me when it's come to I've just always loved the feeling of giving someone something nice to eat and making their day just a little bit better. And yeah.
What were your first steps into a job as a chef?
Oh man, I hated school, and school hated me, and so we had a falling out, and I left school really young. And the deal with Mum was that she would only let me leave school early. I think I was 15, and I could only leave school if I went to this hospitality train. There was like a hospitality training sort of thing set up for kids that just where school wasn't working for them. Between 12 and 15, I'd sort of went through a few different things about what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to be a fireman and a helicopter pilot, and then I just started cooking more. So then when I got to the age of 15, I was like, yeah, like that's what I want to do. And so I started this. It was like I think from memory, it was about a 3-month full-time course. And then started working in a couple of takeaway joints. Then, rose up through the ranks, went from takeaway joint to pub to hotels. And so in New Zealand, I spent most of my time working in hotels.
What did you take from those early years?
I think starting from places that, by no means fancy, like literally just like, a pub getting smashed for lunch and just schnitties and pies. It's just how to work hard and how to hustle, and you had to be fast. You had to have. So that really really worked for me. Because the way that my head works is I like to have things mapped out. And before going into a kitchen, I hated being a teenager. It was, there was a bunch of stuff going on, and it just really used to just. I wasn't enjoying life, and then I would go into a kitchen, and it was fast paced, and people needed you to perform, and there wasn't. There was very little room for error. Sorry, and so I really sort of enjoyed that environment, and then over the years, one of the good things about being a chef is that most people in hospitality, I think that people think of chefs as cooks, and we do nice things with pigs and food and stuff, but you have to be you have to be really organised. You have to be you have to be able to manage high workload. You need to be able to crisis control situations. You need to be meticulous. You need to be forward thinking. There's a lot of skills that go into being a chef, even before you start getting into the fancy stuff and the things that you see on the magazines or on Instagram.
You spent some of your career in the UK at some pretty incredible restaurants. Do you have any stories of what that experience was like, coming from a small place in New Zealand to sort of London and all of that it offered?
Oh, yeah, man, it was awesome. I loved it. I'd go back to London in a heartbeat. It's a fun town. So I left. So I worked through a few restaurants, and then I got to a point in Wellington before I left New Zealand, and then I worked everywhere that I wanted to work. So then I came to Sydney for a few years, and I worked at Basil de Brasserie, and that was probably one of the most influential restaurants I worked at, because of the meticulous attention to provenance and things like, Tony Pappas wanted to serve shucked oysters, which wasn't being done at the time. And so you had to go through and create programs with Sydney Water and all these sort of things just to be able to be allowed to pop an oyster in a restaurant. And there are not many. I mean, it's a different environment back then to now. Like, it's heavily compliant now, but it was that sort of. He had this vision. I want to open an oyster in a restaurant, and so a chef would normally stick a knife in the back, pop it, chuck it on some ice, you're away. But he had to go through this whole program, rebuild the kitchen, a bunch of stuff, and so his. And also I worked with another really close friend of mine, Michael Clausen, and it was just that focus and dedication and to the ingredients, and that I carried that. I still carry that now. And then by the time I got over to London, I did a brief stint in one of Terence Conran's restaurants, Mezzo, which was incredible. It was a circus. It was, we'd do, massive covers, but it was like all, you'd have a production kitchen so you never actually touched any prep. You'd go in and you'd pick up your 370 portions of salmon that you were serving for lunch and someone else. So it was a huge machine. And then I was very fortunate to get a chance to join the team at the Square under Philip Howard. And that just, it just about killed me. It was a really, really tough environment, and not tough in the sense of you got at the time, Gordo and Aubergine was famous for screaming and shouting. Like, the Philip's kitchen was never like that. It was tough because the expectation of quality from everybody in that kitchen was just freaking phenomenal. And it didn't matter what you touched. Yeah, there was not. One of the first lessons I received working there was when I was going down hard. I was on the hot starters section, and we had this really intricate dish of langoustine and scallop, and it was just a stunning thing. And I didn't see one of the scallops properly because I was just in the shed. I was so far behind. I was going down hard, and so I tried to slip something past. No, the head chef, the two sous chefs pulled me up. It was the guy that was working on I think on the larder section, and he just was like, "Oh, look what he's doing! He's trying," and everybody, the whole brigade, just was like, the whole brigade turned, because it was that moment of you're not doing this because chef told you to doing it. You've let the team was like, "You've let us all down because you're prepared to let something slide." And the ingredients that we worked with over there. So I went from Tony's and Michael's very sort of delicate, free-flowing touch to things that were just ridiculously intricate, really, really precise cooking. It was a stunning experience.
There's all types of breeds of pigs over there. Do you remember any sort of pig dishes in your time at the Square or also Mezzo?
Not like Mezzo was a machine, so I can't even remember if we had pork. There might have been pork on the menu, but I actually can't remember it. The but Mezzo was that thing. Like I was on the fish section, and I was only there for like 2.5 months, and so I didn't touch anything other than pre-cut fish. Um, and the square, we would get pork periodically, but not. I think in the early days, and I also sense this a bit in some restaurants. Like I remember trying to put pork on a menu. It was like 20 years ago, and it had this little bit of a stigma to it. It was like pork's the cheap meat, and if you want to be a fancy restaurant, like you're not going to serve a sausage. So pork would normally take form in beautiful charcuteries or things that were done with that required finesse and craft and or maybe like the airs used for a garnish and things like that. But you'd always see prosciutto and pancetta and lardons. You'd be chucking lardons around like a ninja star. But, but the idea of like doing something like uh, putting a delicious steamed ham on the menu or something like that wasn't really done. And or at least I didn't get exposed a lot to it. And it wasn't until I came back to Sydney that I really leaned into putting whole pigs on the menu, and just enjoyed that thing of showcasing the diversity of the whole entire animal.
Well, tell us about your time when you came back to Sydney. You were head chef at Bayswater Brasserie. What was it like being a head chef?
It it was really good. It was I enjoyed getting back, but when I was the head chef of Bayswater, it was like Bayswater had sort of changed and had changed hands, and the place had kind of lost its magic. And I came back from London with a real enthusiasm to do really amazing kick-ass food. Like I sort of wanted to take what I'd taken from the square, and I wanted to sort of bring that back to Sydney. And it didn't really fit. Bayswater's a brasserie. It's a different beast. And I I love those guys. I've got so much fond memories of it, but I couldn't. It just didn't feel right. And so then I sort of was a little bit disenfranchised and sort of dossed around a few kitchens and did a few jobs here and there, and wasn't really inspired to do. Like nothing really caught me. And then this opportunity popped up in Waterloo, and the the light bulb moment was I was able to take the discipline that I learnt from working in pubs when I was younger, and the intensity to detail that I learnt from both the Square and Bayswater Brasserie, and try to see if I could do something a little bit mental and chuck it into a cafe. And it didn't. It just made sense because to me, like at the time, we were a cafe, and our top selling dish for as long as there was a chicken sandwich, and it was a freaking good chicken sandwich. But um, it really sort of what I found was that like all the dishes, like there was no entree main course. You'd come for a plate of food. You might get like some garlic bread to kick things off. You might finish sharing your dessert, but generally that plate of food was enough to. You don't need much more. We'd always try to sell a chip and a salad on the side because that food costs. You got to work that beast. But so we then did dishes that you could eat and just be satisfied with as a complete thing. And yeah, it was a fun time. And we used to muck around with things like a chicken sandwich, like so what? But it was a chicken and roast corn sandwich, but beautiful chickens, beautiful bread. Everything was made from scratch. We'd strip the corn and roast it in butter and garlic, and stuff the birds, and so there was would take something that was simple, and I look back at it now. We'd take a simple idea and try to make it as hard for ourselves as possible, but ultimately delicious. Like it was just that thing of like if there was a shortcut to be found, it couldn't. It wouldn't. Yeah, you couldn't muck around to the deliciousness. Like if we find a quicker way of prepping corn, yeah, go for it. But the corn is always going to be roasted in butter and garlic and salt and thyme.
You mentioned a bit earlier how much joy you have breaking down a whole pig, and you used to do that in Dank Street Depot. Is there any dishes that you remember from the years, the pork dishes from breaking down those pigs?
Oh man, there's so many. I was actually really, I was, I was trying to rack my brain. Like there was, we did a bacon hash that didn't come from the whole pigs. We'd get spec brought in for that, and I still see that pop up on menus and with friends. Like there's a mate of mine that's just opened up a joint up near Foster, and he's got a bacon hash on there, and it's like one of those ones. It's like it's kind of it's a perfect dish for high volume, massive loads of flavor. You just like braising, you're rendering down big, cubes of speck, and then in all that fat, you just loads of onions and garlic and rosemary, and you just roast it all down until it becomes sticky, and then you chuck the potatoes in, and then you just end up with this big fatty vat of roasted, delicious stuff, and then just whack a couple of poached eggs on it. But then when it came to the breaking down the whole pig, like I used to love slow roasting pigs, like the shoulders and the necks. I used to love brining the legs, and would often steam them or poach them. Sometimes steam them in hay. All the trim, like and this is another thing. When I say I love a whole pig, is like everything. There's not one bit on a pig that's not delicious. And so everything would get used. The fat would make sausages. If there wasn't enough trim for sausages, would make little, maybe like a little patty, and or would make our own pancetta. Pancetta is probably the easiest thing. I tried doing things like bacon and more sophisticated things, but it's when you're not set up for it, it's a bit hard to do. But pancetta is pretty fail safe. All the bones, like I would always use pork bones in my beef jus. I would always put pork mince into my meatballs and my bolognese. So we would use the pork as a primary thing, like such as a slow roasted shoulder or a really delicious cutlet. But we'll use pork as an ingredient in other dishes.
Dank Street Depot, is credited for one of the leaders of the notion of casual dining, and it was more than a decade in existence. Was it hard for you to let go of such an influential establishment?
No, real easy. But yeah. No, yes, it was easy because it was time to go, but it was a very, very difficult process. It meant, I couldn't figure out who I was. And I know that sounds a bit overly dramatic, but what do you call a chef without a kitchen? And Dank Street Depot was so ingrained as part of my identity, and I put so much of myself into it, and that when it did come time to leaving Dank Street, it was pragmatically, it was easy. Its day had done. The difficulties of the landlord, business was going down, a lot more competition. So on that sense, it was easy. But it was that whole sort of really sort of stripping away that massive part of my identity. And I'm very lucky that I had very good friends around me in the support network that actually helped me sort of think about it in a less dramatic way. So, it's like, shut up. Like, you've got all these other skills. You can do this, you can do that. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, thanks for that.
Well, let's talk about those other skills because it's true. Like you've done so many things since then, and we'll probably need like 5-episode podcasts to go through them all. But one of the key features is sustainability within businesses, within culture, within restaurants, and it's not just about food wastage. But can you talk to us about sort of your approach and sort of what you're doing now in that space?
Yeah. So I think it sort of started to touch on it before about the different skills that you gain when you work in hospitality. I was actually listening to one of your podcasts just earlier today, actually, and oh god, I can't remember the lawyer from Melbourne. He did policy and then got into hospitality. And yeah, and what's the name? Sorry, I should remember. Yeah, yeah. So we often hear of people coming from other industries into hospitality and how being a lawyer really helped them understand the compliancy issues of opening a restaurant, etc. Just as an example, but it's kind of not that many people. It's not really thought of like when you're leaving hospitality. Um, you, you kind of get pigeonholed, I think, and I've experienced that a few times. As people go, oh, like even now, people go, "Oh, you're the chef," and it's like, "Yeah, I haven't really cooked for a while, but it's a title that I love." And but so what I did was over the years of Dank Street Devo, I'd done a lot of work for different not for profits and NGOs, and it was myself and Alex Herbert were the founding signatories of the Greenpeace GMO Charter, and so all we were, I built relationships with DPI and New South Wales Farmers Association, and so and oh yeah, and you'll also recall like you and I and Schussman went down to that South Australian thing, and so I was able to sort of take my skills as a chef and sort of hone them into different areas, and with sustainability being the focus. So, I'll wrap up the last 12 years by going. I worked helping raise capital for Australia's first cultivated seaweed industry. In that time, I was sort of doing consultancy work do a consultancy work for a restaurant, but then it turned into a group, and then I joined a consultancy firm. We were doing master plans and really high level strategic work. And in that, I was always the sustainability guy, and it was always driven from a place of passion and determination to make the world better. Which sounds a bit wank when you say it out loud, but it's true. Like I generally believe that that we're at a very important time, and so then over the years, the complexity of the projects and the scale of the projects grew. I've recently finished up as the head of sustainability for a tech company, and that was an incredible role, and really proud of the work that was done there. Um, and so, sustainability, the principles of sustainability are essentially do have as little impact on the natural world as you can, and where possible, listen to the practices of how to look after the environment around you. And so that's kind of what that looks like. But then when it comes to translating it, what does that mean? When with a tech company, being sustainable for an engineer means how your data is moving, what sort of energy is going to the data houses where all that's stored, what sort of energy is being used, and efficient build principles. So in that conversation, sustainability doesn't come up. You're just talking about efficiencies. With if you're talking finance people at the moment, sustainability is returning what is it like 14% for most investors. Like there's more money being invested into climate technology than education and health globally at the moment. And um, and I lost my train of thought. So when we think about sustainability, it's painfully complex, and you need to sort of understand the complexity. But then once you sort of get your head around it, it's actually quite simple. Like it does come down to simple targets. Um, buy from here, not from there. Communicate your values and your goals throughout your supply chain, so all your suppliers and prospective suppliers know what your values are. and there's a lot of nerdy spreadsheets and stuff in there as well.
Well, but give us a kind of examples in the food industry, say, for a restaurant or cafe that, really wants to push into that world, but is sort of uncertain how to sort of become more sustainable all round. How do you approach that, and what can they do?
The first step I suggest is to just sort of look at what you're doing. And most people want to spring into action straight away. And if you want to spring into action, there's some really, really awesome things you can do. You look at your waste streams. If you've got a hospitality venue and you're not electrifying everything as fast as possible, then in the next couple of years, you're going to be paying too much money for your gas but you're also going to be less attractive to developers who want to have a 5-star green rated building. So there are things that you can do like quickly, such as change your power bill. Don't get a gas combi, get an electric combi. Do the numbers on what it would look like to get an induction cooktop as opposed to a 6-burner. These are sort of things. But the first thing you do is just have a look at your business. Have a look at how much you're throwing away. Have a look at what you're throwing away. So, if you're chucking away loads and loads of cardboard boxes from your deliveries, talk to your supplier. Just go, look, hey, can you either take the boxes back, or can we have containers and just sort them around? Look at for a hospitality venue, I'd always really, really encourage the two biggest motivating factors. Number one is your customers, and number two is food and beverage. And with your customers, we know that about 74% of Australians take climate change seriously and want to see action done on it. And I won't go down the rabbit hole of talking about the complexities of climate action, but 74% of your customers, 3/4 of your own, care. So what is the language that you're sharing with them? Are you giving them something that makes them feel good about it? An example I used the other day was like, when I was talking to a restaurant group that I've just started working with, it's not about forcing your customers to buy wine from the tap, because a lot of venues, they need old mate with a black card to come in and drop $450 on a bottle of wine that makes them look awesome. And so it's not about removing that. You can't cannibalize your offer. You have to give your customer what they want. You need to make them feel awesome and feel like rock stars. So what are the things that you can impact? Are you buying your meat from a good place? Is the animal husbandry appropriate for, like, if you don't care, you're just bashing out if you don't care and you're just bashing out high volume food, you will have to care in about 5 years' time, because that's the way sustainability is working. So if you do care, jump on and engage with as many people in your supply chain as possible.
You've made a huge career shift, utilising all the skills that you've acquired over the years in hospitality and in other areas. How different is your life, and what do you love about what you do?
My life is very different. I have to pay for salt flakes. There's one of the things that I missed when I stepped away from restaurants is you don't have that amazing food on tap. You have to buy it like a normal person, and that can be a little bit inconvenient. So there's that. But when I think back on it, and I think about all these different roles that I've had and the different types of work that I'm doing, and I'll give an example of I'm on the board of this organisation called the Pure Foundation, and we're working very closely with communities, and we've got a couple of training programs around mentoring and helping people on country up north, and in this place called Mangala, and working with traditional knowledge systems and learning about culture and culturally appropriate sort of projects that we're sort of working on, and there's a bunch of stuff in there around EV conversions that we're doing, and there's a lot of sustainability work. But it's that thing that I have always been, like I said earlier, I've always wanted to make people happy, and I've always felt responsible for how I make them happy. I've always had a sense of responsibility around the produce that I purchase, because I know that if I make the wrong decision, then I'm not really looking after the land. And it's my life is very, very different. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the richness of human stories and the depth of connection that you build. Hospitality is all about customers and farmers and the inside jokes in the kitchen and all that sort of stuff. And you build this rich, diverse relationships with kitchens don't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you can speak what language you speak. If you can poach eggs, you got the job as a breakfast cook. And so this richness and diversity of humans is the one thing that still just makes me so happy when I think about the different things that I'm doing and have done. Like, it's not all been good, but it's you mistakes and stuff. But it's like the work that we're doing with communities at the moment, really looking at the challenges facing First Nations people in Australia and the obstacles that are set up, and then taking the knowledge of sustainability and more sort of project management and strategic thinking, but doing it in a culturally appropriate way is a really beautiful and exciting thing that I'm very much engaged in at the moment. And I couldn't have done it if I didn't know how to run a kitchen.
Well, Jared, it's absolutely inspiring what you're doing in so many facets, and changing businesses and lives, and changing the way we think about particularly sustainability and food. We've loved having you on the Crackling today to hear your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Absolutely loved being here. Take care, Huck.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.